Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So, if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Man with the Dogs in the Park. It was a crisp afternoon when my wife and I decided to take a walk through a quiet park nestled in the neighborhood. We often use these walks as a way to talk, reconnect, and enjoy the subtle simplicity of life. As we strolled under the shade of the trees, her hand in mine, I found myself pausing mid-sentence. A wave of unease swept over me, slow at first, then all-encompassing. It wasn't just the kind of discomfort that comes from a passing shadow, no. This was heavier, almost primal. My wife must have felt it too because her expression mirrored mine, brows furrowed, eyes shifting. Something felt wrong, very wrong, and the source of that wrongness was behind us. We turned slowly, trying not to alarm each other, and that's when we saw it. A small, beat-up blue truck pulling up along the edge of the park. Out stepped a man and 2 dogs, and from the first moment I laid eyes on him, everything about him made my skin crawl. The man was unkempt, with long, greasy hair that hadn't seen a trim in years. His clothes were stained and disheveled, hanging off him like they hadn't been washed in months. His dogs, large and quiet, trotted at his heels obediently, but even they seemed odd, too alert, too watchful. He didn't smile or nod at us. He didn't acknowledge us like most casual park-goers do. Instead, he stared for a beat too long, then began to walk the path parallel to ours, keeping an uncomfortable distance that felt neither close nor far enough to be innocent. We tried to mind our own business, talking again, but I could feel him tailing us. Every so often he'd mutter under his breath. The words were garbled, but I could make out political names, conspiracy theories, fragments of thought stitched together by paranoia and obsession. After about 10 minutes of this bizarre shadowing, we sat on a bench to regroup. The man didn't keep walking like a normal passerby might have. Instead, he slowed, then lingered a few feet away, staring out into nothing, still mumbling to himself. My wife whispered that she was getting a bad feeling, and I agreed. This wasn't someone who had just wandered into the park. This felt deliberate, calculated. We stood and made our way back to the street, deciding we'd had enough of our walk. We hadn't gone more than 2 blocks when I heard the low rumble of an engine. That same blue truck passed us slowly, the man staring directly at us from the driver's seat. A chill rippled down my spine. Then, a few minutes later, it passed again, this time from the opposite direction. There was no mistaking it. He was circling us. When we finally made it home, our hearts were pounding. We ducked inside, turned off the lights and drew the blinds. I moved through the house silently, checking all the windows, locking every door. Then, I peeked through the curtain of our front window. Sure enough, the blue truck was driving past again. Not fast, not aimless. He was looking, searching for us. I didn't know what he wanted, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. We stayed quiet, barely breathing. The eerie silence of the house interrupted only by the occasional creak of the old wood or the hum of the refrigerator. Time crawled. After about an hour, I checked again, and he was gone. But the feeling he left behind lingered, staining the air like the scent of something rotten. That night, neither of us could sleep. Every sound felt louder than usual. The wind brushing against the windows, the creaks of the saddling house. Even the ticking clock seemed to echo in the silence. I kept replaying the man's face in my mind, his odd, vacant eyes, his muttering, the way he followed us with such intent. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? A man walked his dogs near us, drove past our house a few times. Without something more concrete, they'd just brush it off as coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. We both did. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a warning, an encounter with something off. something potentially dangerous. Over the next few days, I changed our routine. We took walks in different parks at different times. I started carrying pepper spray and checked the car before getting in. My wife began glancing over her shoulder more often. We never saw the blue truck again, but the memory of that day stuck with us like a bruise that refused to fade. It was a reminder that you could be going about your ordinary day, taking a stroll in the sunshine, and still stumble upon something that doesn't belong, something that watches from the edges of normal life, waiting. I eventually told a friend about what had happened. He laughed it off at first, calling it paranoia, but when I described the man and how persistent he had been, even he admitted that it was unnerving. He told me to stay alert, maybe get a dash cam or a security camera. That same evening, I ordered a home security system. I wasn't going to take chances. You hear stories about stalkers, random encounters that escalate, people who fixate for no reason. I didn't want to be one of those stories. Not if I could help it. It's scary to admit, but sometimes you get a gut feeling about people. Something ancient and instinctive, and you have to trust it. The strangest part of it all, perhaps, is that we'll never know what that man wanted. Was he dangerous? Mentally unstable? Did he mistake us for someone else? Or was he just a drifter looking to cause fear? The not knowing is its own kind of fear, a fear that hums softly in the background of everyday life. Every time I walk through a park now, I find myself scanning the tree line, checking for odd shapes, cars that don't belong, faces that don't belong quite right. It's a habit I picked up that day, and I don't think it's one I'll ever fully shake. Sometimes I wonder how many others he's done this to. Was it a one-time thing? Or is he still out there, picking a new couple every day to trail for a while, to unsettle, to make feel hunted? I wonder if anyone else reported something similar, or if we were just unlucky. When I searched local forums, nothing came up. No mention of a man in a blue truck. It was like he'd appeared out of thin air, left his mark, and vanished. That's what makes him dangerous. He was like a ghost with bad intentions, slipping into lives just long enough to leave you rattled, but not long enough to leave a trail. Over time, we returned to normalcy. The fear faded, though it never disappeared. It lingered just beneath the surface, tucked between memory and caution. Sometimes, the most terrifying experiences aren't the loud, bloody ones. Sometimes, it's a man with matted hair and two quiet dogs who never speaks to you but knows exactly where you live. It's the kind of story you don't realize is horror until it's over, and by then, all you can do is make sure the doors are locked and hope he never comes back. Story 2. The vanishing phone and the park stranger. It had been a long day filled with errands, store runs, and the usual hours at my retail job. When I finally returned home and dropped my keys into the familiar bowl by the door, I did what I always do, checked for my phone, only this time it wasn't there. I searched the kitchen, the coffee table, my coat pockets, but nothing. A rising unease began to build in my chest. I retraced my steps, realizing I might have left it in my car, but after turning over every seat and floor mat, it was clear my phone wasn't there either. I was living alone at the time, and without a landline or spare device, I had no other way to call it. That's when I remembered the Find My iPhone feature on my MacBook. I fired it up, half expecting it not to work, but to my relief, the screen pinged back with a location, a park across town that I hadn't visited that day. The strangeness of that didn't hit me right away. I just wanted my phone back. I copied the address onto a sticky note and headed out, gripping the wheel tightly as the sky turned deep blue and the streetlights began to blink on. It was already dark by the time I pulled into the small gravel lot of the park. It was an eerie, quiet place, bordered by open fields and darkened trees. Only one other car sat at the far end of the lot, parked in a way that made it hard to see who, if anyone, was inside. I got out and began my search, sweeping my flashlight across the grass, benches and sidewalks. I checked around the swing set and under the bleachers by the softball fields, but no sign of my phone. I wondered if the app was malfunctioning, perhaps delayed or inaccurate. But then my eyes drifted back toward the single car still parked in the lot. A cold thought slid into my mind. What if my phone was in that vehicle? What if someone had stolen it and parked here for a reason? I kept my distance but couldn't shake the suspicion. Whoever it was had remained in their car this whole time, never turning on a light or even opening a door. I lingered in the shadows of the trees, watching from afar, then decided it wasn't worth a confrontation. Maybe if they drove off, I could watch which way they went and update the location later. I returned to my car and started to drive away, but the moment my headlights swept across the lot and my tires crunched onto the road, the car behind me flicked on its lights and followed. It was unmistakable. They had waited for me to leave, and now they were tailing me. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, coincidence, nothing more, but each turn I made, they mirrored. Right, then another right, then another. I was looping my way through the neighborhood, and they were sticking to me like a shadow. That's when the panic really kicked in. Fortunately, I knew where the closest police station was. I turned onto a main road, heart hammering, my eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. Every red light felt like a trap. Every second ticked louder. I made the final turn and pulled into the lot of the station, and just as expected, the car behind me didn't follow. They drove right past, but not quickly, slowly, as if making sure I saw them before disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, then finally went inside to report the incident. The officer on duty was sympathetic, but there wasn't much they could do without a plate number or a clearer threat. I went back home feeling shaken, but grateful I'd thought quickly enough to find safety. When I checked to find my iPhone app again, the location had changed, jumping to a completely different neighborhood. Moments later, it vanished entirely. The phone was gone. I replaced my phone the next day, but something in me changed after that. There's something uniquely unsettling about being followed, about realizing that while you were searching for something lost, someone else might have been searching for you. I still don't know how that person got my phone. Maybe I dropped it and they found it. Maybe it was taken from a store counter or my car earlier in the day. What unsettled me most, though, wasn't the loss of the phone. It was that whoever had it didn't just try to steal it and leave. They lured me. They waited. And when I didn't confront them, they followed me home. I don't know what their intentions were. I don't want to know. But it felt personal, like a game of cat and mouse I never agreed to play. For weeks afterward, I watched the road more carefully. I parked in different places. I avoided going out at night unless I had to. I even got into the habit of taking different routes home. I wasn't sure if they knew where I lived, but I wasn't taking chances. I installed a security camera above my front door and kept my blinds shut. That sense of safety I'd once felt in my home was cracked, and it would take time to seal it again. Every time a car slowed near my street, my heart would race. Every time my phone rang from an unknown number, I paused before answering. That single night had changed how I moved through the world. Eventually, the fear settled into a kind of background noise. The memory faded, the camera gathered dust, and life returned to its regular rhythm. But every now and then I'd catch myself wondering about the person in the park. Why were they there? Why did they wait? Were they hoping I'd come closer? Confront them? Did they want to scare me, rob me, or worse? Or was it all some twisted coincidence? My phone lost, and a stranger coincidentally being in the same dark park at night, too withdrawn or strange to explain himself. No matter how much I tried to reason it away, the feeling in my gut always returned. That wasn't coincidence. That was intention. One night, months later, I was watching a local news segment about a string of petty crimes that had occurred across town, mostly electronics stolen from cars or stores. They briefly mentioned a suspect caught on surveillance footage who had yet to be identified. A flash of footage played for a few seconds. A man stepping out of a car. Slim build, long coat, messy hair. I leaned in closer. The footage was too grainy, too brief to be sure, but something about the shape of his posture, the awkward stillness of his stance, sparked something in me. I turned off the TV and sat in silence, unsure if I had seen the same man. I suppose I'll never know. But part of me hopes it was him, because that would mean someone was watching. I never went back to that park, not because I was scared, but because I felt like I'd seen something there that wasn't meant to be seen. Some people pass through the world like ghosts, unnoticed, unaccounted for, slipping between the cracks of public places and private thoughts. And every now and then, one of those ghosts brushes up against your life, just long enough to unsettle everything. That's what he felt like, a ghost with a plan. And even though I came out of it physically unharmed, something inside me was rattled that night. Because once you've looked into the eyes of someone who sees you as an object rather than a person, you start to wonder how many others there are, just out of sight. There's something about silence that changes when you're afraid. That night, when I drove home and sat in the quiet afterward, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed in on me like a second skin. Every creak of the house became a footstep, every shadow a threat. And yet, I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. Telling the story out loud felt like opening a door I had just locked, like giving power to a memory that didn't deserve it. But here I am, telling it now, because maybe it can be a warning. Maybe it will remind someone else to trust that instinct, the one that says, something's not right, even when the world around you looks completely normal. Especially then. Story 3. The woman in the shared Airbnb. It was a decision born out of practicality. I had an important job interview scheduled early the next morning, and rather than drive 3 hours at dawn, I opted for an overnight stay at an Airbnb in a neighbouring city. I arrived just after 7 in the evening, weary but relieved. The neighbourhood was pleasant and quiet, lined with modest family homes that all looked lived in, warm and typical. I parked in the driveway and let myself into the house, dragging my suitcase behind me with the kind of calm that comes with familiarity. But the calm didn't last. As I stepped into the hallway, a woman appeared from around the corner, startling me so much I nearly dropped my bag. She smiled and introduced herself as another guest staying in the other half of the house. I wasn't expecting to see anyone else. My booking hadn't mentioned anything about the space being shared. It took a moment for my heart rate to slow, but I shook her hand and introduced myself, still a bit thrown off. I headed to my room and pulled out my phone to double-check the listing. Nowhere in the description did it say anything about it being a shared rental, though the photos had only shown a single bedroom. Something felt off, but not enough to make a fuss over. I figured it might have been an oversight or a last-minute change by the host. Still, I messaged them to clarify. I hadn't even gotten to hit send when there was a knock at my door. The same woman again, this time more talkative than before. She asked me where I was from, what I was doing in the city, and then started chatting about herself with a kind of forced intimacy that felt out of place. I tried to subtly signal that I was tired and not interested in small talk, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Her eyes lingered too long. Her smile was a little too eager. It wasn't hostile, but something about her was unnerving. She stood just a little too close, spoke a little too softly, and seemed oddly focused on everything I said. Eventually she wandered off again and I returned to my phone. Before I could finish reading the listing, she appeared once more, this time in the kitchen. I had gone there to heat up some food I'd picked up along the way, hoping to decompress before bed. But again she was there, hovering, talking. She asked if I wanted to see her room, said it had better lighting or something like that. She was persistent, too persistent. I declined politely, then more firmly. The smile on her face began to falter. Her friendly tone grew clipped. I sensed her annoyance building. She didn't take rejection well, not even casual rejection like this. There was a shift in her expression. something bitter beneath the smile. Just then my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from the host, and it made my stomach twist. There should be no one else in the house. Please call the police immediately. I froze, slowly lifting my eyes to meet hers. Her gaze had hardened now, suspicion burning behind it, as if she knew what the message had said without even looking. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slightly, listening. That's when I heard it. A door creaking open down the hall, followed by heavy footsteps stomping through the house. I didn't wait to see who it was. I dropped everything and sprinted for the front door, the sound of footsteps quickening behind me. As I flung open the door and darted into the street, I caught a glimpse of a man, wide-eyed and charging just as I crossed the threshold. I jumped into my car, fumbled the keys and tore away from the curb as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station several miles away, parked under the harsh glow of the overhead lights, and finally called the police. The authorities arrived at the house shortly after but found nothing. The man and woman had vanished. No trace of them, no sign of forced entry, and, disturbingly, none of my belongings had been taken. I returned to gather my things, still trembling. Everything I had brought was sitting exactly where I had left it. Somehow, that made it worse. If they were thieves, wouldn't they have taken something? If they were squatters, wouldn't they have run when they realized I was calling for help? But nothing had been touched. Nothing had been stolen. It felt as if the entire encounter had been planned. And yet, they didn't take anything. They didn't rob me. They didn't destroy the place. They just disappeared. Which left me with one unsettling possibility. Maybe it wasn't theft they were after. Maybe it was me. For days after the incident, I struggled to sleep. I kept replaying her strange smiles, her too friendly tone, the way she insisted I come see her room. I remembered the cold look in her eyes the moment I started backing away. I thought about what might have happened if I had gone with her, if I'd stepped into that room, if I hadn't gotten the message from the host at exactly the right time. My mind filled in the blanks with every possible horror scenario. Was it a trafficking scheme? A setup for something darker? Was I just one of many? Or was it a one-time thing? An improvised plan that fell apart the moment I resisted? I didn't have the answers, and maybe that was the scariest part. The absence of closure. The mystery that hung in the silence, long after the danger had passed. Eventually I received a message from Airbnb support. They had investigated and removed the listing. They apologized and issued a refund, offering credit for future bookings. But the experience had left a deep scar. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the fright I'd felt that night. It was about the realization that something could go so wrong so fast in a place meant to be safe. A rented home, a clean listing, a normal neighborhood. It all looked so normal. But evil doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it waits in borrowed homes and borrowed faces, watching, waiting for the right moment to close in. I still use Airbnb, but I do so with a wariness I never had before. I triple-check listings, avoid shared spaces, read every review like it's a lifeline. I lock every door and never assume I'm alone unless I've checked every room myself. There's a part of me that wants to believe it was all just a fluke, a rare and unfortunate experience. But another part of me whispers that I was lucky, that the message from the host arrived just in time, and if it hadn't, I don't let myself think about that for too long, because that night taught me something I can't unlearn. Safety is an illusion, and sometimes the person you share a house with isn't supposed to be there at all. Even now, years later, I think about her. I wonder who she was, where she went, what they were doing in that house. It haunts me in quiet moments, when I pass unfamiliar homes or hear soft footsteps behind me. And I've never forgotten that face, the subtle smile, the tired eyes, the brittle cheerfulness cracking beneath the surface. She had the kind of presence that doesn't fade easily, a presence that clung to the walls like a shadow. That night, I didn't just leave behind an Airbnb. I left behind the version of myself that believed places were safe simply because they were supposed to be. Now I know better. Story 4. The Carpool Detour. It started like any ordinary Sunday evening. I'd spent the weekend visiting my boyfriend who lived in the next city over, just an hour's drive away. We'd done it countless times. I didn't own a car or a license since I lived in a city where subways made travel easy, but because of the ongoing train strikes in France, my usual travel routine had to be changed. I turned, as many do during such disruptions, to a popular carpooling app. It wasn't the first time I'd used it. I'd relied on it for nearly a year and a half with no trouble. I always preferred to book rides with women since I'm a 21-year-old woman myself. This time was no different, or so I thought. The woman I booked with messaged me directly, saying she would arrive at 6:20 p.m. She was punctual. She looked to be in her late 40s, and although her demeanor was slightly off when I first got in, I brushed it off as nothing. Maybe she was tired, maybe distracted. But soon my instincts began to stir in ways I hadn't anticipated. We drove in silence for a while. I glanced at my phone, scrolling absent-mindedly, but a thought kept creeping in. Something about her driving. I began to notice she hadn't taken the usual exit. We were approaching a toll booth, one I wasn't familiar with, and I grew concerned. In our app-based carpool system, it's standard for drivers to take the highway directly to the destination. Any detour means higher tolls, inconvenience, and question. When I realized we were far from the correct route, my instincts screamed at me. Something was wrong. I looked over at her and asked cautiously why we hadn't taken the exit. Her response was odd and unsettling. I just wanted to visit something cool with you. Her tone was too casual, too dismissive for such a strange detour. It wasn't a joke. She wasn't laughing. She meant it. My heart began to pound. I tried to reason with her, my voice sharper now, firm. I paid for this ride to go to a specific destination. I'm not here to hang out or go sightseeing with you. Please take the proper route. She kept smiling that eerie, detached smile. Don't be afraid. I just want to spend some time with you. Her words, though spoken softly, chilled me. I knew I had to act fast. I texted my boyfriend and half-sister with a screenshot of our chat, my location, and a warning. I told them if they didn't hear from me within the hour, call the police. As she veered onto an even narrower road, more isolated and lined with trees, I made up a lie. My father works for Interpol. If you don't take the correct route in the next minute, I'll text him. It was untrue. He had worked there long ago, but left and had no contact with me. Still, the threat worked. Her mood shifted instantly. The smile vanished. Her calm mask shattered into visible panic. She began cursing, yelling at me, then gripping the wheel tightly as she jerked the car back onto the main road. I didn't say another word. Neither did she. The ride back to my correct destination was tense and silent, the air thick with unspoken fear and rage. She dropped me off and told me to get out, practically spitting the words. I didn't hesitate. I got out of the car and walked away as fast as I could, only turning to glance back when I was at a safe distance. She was gone. Just like that. The road behind me was empty, but I was still shaking. That kind of fear leaves a residue on the skin. Once home, I immediately contacted the carpooling app's support team. They were responsive, grateful for the warning, and promised to investigate. A few days later, they followed up, thanking me again and confirming they had permanently removed her profile from the platform. The formalities helped, but they didn't erase the experience. I kept thinking about the moment she told me she just wanted to spend time with me, how easily she veered off the planned path, how calmly she spoke those disturbing words. What would have happened if I hadn't lied? What would have happened if I hadn't acted when I did? The thought lingered long after the app erased her profile. The idea that someone would use something as routine and trusted as a carpooling app to isolate and mislead someone like that horrified me. She wasn't trying to rob me. She didn't demand money. Her intentions were something else, something far less clear and far more disturbing. The detour, the isolated roads, the fake reason. her reaction to my made-up threat. It all painted a picture that made my skin crawl. I realized how vulnerable I had been. One passenger, one driver, no one else. One wrong road away from disappearing entirely. If she hadn't believed me about my father, if she hadn't panicked, I might not be here now, telling this story. In the days that followed, I thought about all the subtle red flags I'd dismissed. Her tone when she first greeted me, the way she stared ahead too intently while driving, the little sigh she gave when I pulled out my phone. I'd thought nothing of them in the moment, but now they returned to me in vivid clarity. I told myself I'd done everything right, paid attention, stayed alert, responded quickly, but the fear still lingered. I had been lucky. I knew many others weren't. The worst part was knowing she had likely done this before. Perhaps not all the way, perhaps only testing the waters, but people like that don't start with grand schemes. They start with small, quiet detours. Eventually I told my mother about what happened. She listened in silence, then hugged me tightly without saying a word. Later she looked me in the eyes and told me something I've never forgotten. You're braver than you know, but always remember, it's okay to say no. It's okay to trust your instincts, even if people think you're overreacting. That advice stayed with me. Since then, I've been far more cautious, not just with rides, but with how I respond to unease. I've learned to listen to that inner voice, the one that whispers before your mind catches up. That voice saved me that day, disguised as intuition, but driven by a will to survive. Now, whenever I open a travel app or plan a trip, I think about that ride. It's a quiet memory that flickers in the background, a reminder that evil doesn't always come with flashing lights or a raised voice. Sometimes it speaks gently, offers a ride, smiles like a friend, and takes the wrong exit when no one is watching. That's the kind of fear that follows you, not in loud footsteps, but in the subtle choices you make every day afterward, the ones that keep you safe, the ones that help you trust yourself when it matters most. Story 5. The Stranger at the Window. 3 years ago, I moved into a small home not far from where I'd previously been living. It wasn't some unfamiliar town, just another corner of the same city, about a mile from the apartment I'd called home for the past few years. The move itself was uneventful, quick, and necessary. I wasn't in the best financial place at the time, so I'd had to go with what I could afford, and that meant settling in a part of town known for its rougher edges. The reputation wasn't great. Crime rates, police sirens in the distance, whispers of break-ins, but the house was all I could manage. It was a one-story unit with faded white paint, a small backyard, and a creaky wooden fence. Nothing fancy. On move-in day, I barely noticed my neighbours. I spent most of the day dragging boxes inside, setting furniture down, and trying not to think about how quiet the street felt. No kids riding bikes, no voices, just wind brushing the leaves and the occasional passing car. It was strange, but I told myself it was fine. The second day, while shifting my office furniture around, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Through the window, I spotted a man standing in my driveway. He wasn't moving, just standing there. His posture was oddly casual, hands in his pockets, staring toward the house like he was waiting for something. He looked about 25, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. I thought maybe he was just passing through, maybe a neighbour or someone who'd gotten turned around, but then he stepped into the yard. He didn't approach the house directly. Instead, he wandered around the edge, peering through the windows from a distance. I moved away from my own window and quickly went downstairs, my heart pounding. When I stepped outside to confront him, he was gone. Just like that. No sign of him on the sidewalk, no movement on the street. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. I waited a while, still on edge, then went back inside and locked the door. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. Maybe I was overreacting. The rest of the day passed quietly. I resumed unpacking and even left to grab some lunch. Still, I couldn't shake that image of him, standing there, watching the house. When night came, I was still organizing my bedroom. Boxes scattered across the floor, lamps unplugged, furniture still shifting into place. By 10 p.m. I was exhausted. I left the rest of the mess as it was, turned off the lights and climbed into bed. My body gave in easily to sleep, but somewhere around 3 o'clock a.m. I woke up without knowing why. The room was silent. I glanced at the digital clock glowing on the nightstand, rubbed my eyes and turned over, hoping to fall back asleep. That's when I heard it. A low, muffled noise coming from downstairs. It was subtle, like something dragging across the floor. I held my breath, waiting to see if I imagined it. Then I heard it again. A long, slow scrape, and then silence. I sat up, my pulse quickening. I slipped out of bed, crept to the door and opened it just a crack. The hallway stretched into darkness. Every instinct told me to call the police, but I had to know what I was dealing with. I moved down the hallway, step by step, until I reached the staircase. I paused, listening. All was quiet. Then, just as I started down the stairs, I flicked on the light. Everything looked normal at first glance. No broken glass, no open doors, no signs of a break-in. But then I noticed the furniture. Some of it had been moved. Not all, just enough to be noticeable. Boxes that had been tucked against the wall were now sitting in the middle of the room. Shelves that had been flush with the corner had been dragged outward, and behind them the walls had been tampered with. There were cuts, scrapes, pieces of drywall that had been pulled away like someone had been digging into them, searching for something. My blood ran cold. Whoever had been in my home hadn't come to steal a television or a laptop. They were looking for something hidden, something they believed was inside those walls. I ran back upstairs and called the police, my voice barely steady. When they arrived, they swept through the house, checking every room, closet and crawl space. Nothing. No intruder. No obvious signs of entry or exit. No fingerprints. It was like the person had never been there. But they had. I'd seen the furniture moved. I'd heard the dragging noises, and the carved-out wall cavities were proof enough. The officers chalked it up to someone with experience, someone who knew how to enter and leave without a trace. They asked if anyone else had keys. They checked the windows for tampering. Nothing. The only possible entry point was the back door, but even that was still locked. Over the next week, I couldn't sleep. I installed new locks, bought a security system and left lights on through the night. Every creak made me flinch. Every gust of wind against the window made me freeze. The thought that someone had been in my home while I slept, possibly watching, possibly waiting, it haunted me. But the part that kept me up most was the memory of the man I saw in the drive. Was it him? Had he come back? Had he been watching the house, waiting for the right moment? The police couldn't confirm anything. No cameras, no evidence, no leads. Just a bunch of torn drywall and an unsettling mystery. I asked neighbours if they'd seen anything. None had. Most hadn't even known anyone had moved in. Time passed, and nothing else happened. I replaced the damaged walls, arranged the furniture, and forced myself back into a routine. But I never felt truly safe there again. The memory of those carved-out portions stayed with me. They weren't random. They were purposeful, targeted, like someone believed something valuable had been hidden there long ago. Gold? Documents? A secret? I'll never know. I tore apart the walls myself a few weeks later just to be sure. There was nothing. No signs of hidden compartments. No unusual markings. Just insulation and wood. It left me with more questions than answers. What had they been looking for? Why had they chosen my house? Eventually I moved again. I couldn't stay in that place. Even if it was quiet afterward, the unease never left. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and feel the weight of silence pressing down on me. I'd find myself checking the locks 3 or 4 times a night, looking out the window to make sure the driveway was empty. That sense of being watched never truly disappeared. Whoever had broken in that night had done more than move furniture and tear into walls. They had pierced the veil of normalcy, broken the illusion that home is always safe, always untouched by the strange and the sinister. And that was something I couldn't patch up with drywall or a fresh coat of paint. I still think about him sometimes, the man in the driveway, the one who vanished before I could confront him. I wonder if he's done the same thing to others. If he's still out there, lurking in someone else's yard, waiting for the next house that might hold something hidden in the walls. Or maybe it wasn't about the house at all. Maybe it was about me. Maybe he chose me. I don't know. I'll never know. But that experience taught me something important. Sometimes, the scariest intruders aren't the ones who break your windows or force the door. They're the ones who slip in quietly, search your walls, and vanish without a sound, leaving you with nothing but questions and the echo of silence that no longer feels like home. Story 6. The Auto Parts Store Stalker. I used to work at a modest little auto parts store tucked into a quiet shopping strip on the edge of town. It wasn't a chain or a corporate branch, just a local family-run shop that had been there for years. I loved the job. I've always had a passion for cars, and talking to customers about engines and batteries made the days go by fast. Most shifts were uneventful, filled with stocking shelves, checking inventory and helping customers with basic parts. But one shift, one very quiet afternoon, something happened that still makes my stomach twist whenever I think about it. It was near closing time, and I was working alone. That wasn't too unusual. On slower days, we'd only schedule one person to shut the place down. I was behind the counter organizing some small parts when the front door opened and a man stepped inside. From the moment he walked in, something about him didn't feel right. He was tall and thin with long, unkempt blonde hair that brushed past his shoulders. His eyes were dull, unfocused, and he didn't say a word as he entered. He just stood there at the front of the store, not looking at any of the products, not approaching the counter. I greeted him, trying to sound as friendly as possible, and asked if I could help him find something. Without even looking at me, he replied, "No, that was it, just one word." Then he turned and wandered slowly down one of the aisles. It was odd, but people can be shy or distracted. I didn't think much of it until another customer came in, a man needing help with a car battery. I helped him, rang him up, and we chatted briefly before he left. In that time, I completely forgot about the first guy. It wasn't until I was alone again that I remembered. I looked around and didn't see him anywhere. I figured he'd left while I was helping the other customer. The store had been quiet for nearly an hour afterward, and as I prepared to close, I went through the usual routine. I locked the front door from the inside so no more customers could come in, then walked the store to make sure no one was still inside. I checked every aisle. Nothing. The store wasn't very big, so it didn't take long. I assumed I was alone. I went back to the counter to finish paperwork and tidy up, but just as I approached the register, I heard something behind me. It was fast, sharp footsteps on the tile. I turned, and there he was, that same man from earlier, sprinting toward me from the back of the store. I barely had time to react. I yanked open the front door, not even caring that it was supposed to be locked for the night, and bolted outside into the parking lot. The sun had already set, and the lot was nearly empty. I sprinted toward my car as fast as I could, hearing his footsteps thundering behind me. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I reached my vehicle, flung the door open and threw myself inside. I slammed it shut and locked it just as he reached me. But he didn't stop. He rammed into the car, body slamming the door with full force. Then he started pulling at the handle, trying to get in. I was too shocked to scream. I just sat there, frozen, watching him as he circled the car, then returned to my window and started banging on the glass. He hit it again, and again, then backed up a few steps. That's when he bent down and picked up a rock from the edge of the lot. He raised it above his head, and I instinctively threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed out of the parking spot. He froze mid-throw, startled by the sudden movement. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted off, straight behind the store, disappearing into the shadows. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to catch my breath, hands trembling on the steering wheel. I debated driving away and not looking back, but something in me said to stay and make sure the place was secure. It was my responsibility after all. I drove a small circle around the lot, making sure he wasn't hiding behind another vehicle, then parked again and carefully made my way back inside. I locked the door the right way this time and immediately called the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I stood behind the counter, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. The minutes felt like hours, and then, through the glass, I saw him again. Just a blur at first, but unmistakable. He ran back through the lot, then vanished once more into the night. I thought he might try to return, maybe even try to break in again, but within minutes, flashing red and blue lights filled the lot. The officers listened to my story, took my statement, and promised to sweep the area. They said he matched the description of a man reported acting strangely at a nearby strip mall just days prior. They didn't say much else, but I could tell by the way they looked at each other that they knew more than they were saying. After the incident, I didn't work a closing shift alone again for a long time. My manager was understanding and always made sure someone else was scheduled with me, but the damage was done. I'd catch myself flinching whenever the door creaked open. Every time a quiet customer entered, I'd brace myself for something to go wrong. I scanned aisles carefully before locking up. I even began carrying pepper spray in my pocket just in case. I never saw him again, and the police never followed up with any news. But I kept replaying that moment in my head, the way he waited, hiding somewhere in the store, watching me, planning. It wasn't just an impulsive attack. He had waited until I was alone, until I felt safe. That's what still bothers me the most. To this day, I don't know what his intent was. He didn't try to rob me. He didn't say anything threatening. He didn't even seem angry. Just driven, focused, like he had made a decision and was carrying it out. That blank look in his eyes as he ran toward me still haunts me. There was no emotion, no hesitation, just movement. And maybe that's what fear really is. Not the screaming or the threats, but the quiet resolve of someone who sees you as nothing more than a target, something to grab, something to harm, a piece in their own twisted story, and you, without warning, are caught in the middle of it. Even now, whenever I pass by that old strip mall, I glance toward the store, half expecting to see him standing there again, just outside the reach of memory, just beyond the edge of the light. That one shift changed how I see people, how I move through the world. It made me more alert, more cautious, but it also made me appreciate something I never thought much about before. The right to feel safe in a place you work, a place you know, and how easily that safety can be taken away by one person, hiding in plain sight. Story 7. The man who took my phone in the park. It was just an ordinary evening a few months ago when my friend Mikey and I headed to our usual park for a workout. It was the kind of park that had everything: a big playground, wide grassy fields, basketball courts, baseball diamonds, and even a few picnic areas tucked beneath shaded trees. It was a sprawling place, quiet during the week but always reliable for space and a peaceful run. We went there often, usually for conditioning or pick-up games, and that day was no different. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the lawn as we jogged back and forth across the field. It was a time of day when most people were starting to leave, when the family picnics wound down and the kids began heading home. Soon, the only people left were a few stragglers scattered around, and the echo of our shoes hitting the grass. When we were done, we walked back across the field to the far parking lot, breathing heavily but laughing about something dumb that had happened earlier in the day. I unlocked my car, and as we climbed in, a sudden realization struck me. My phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the seats, the cup holders, the floor. Nothing. That sinking feeling hit me hard. I'd probably left it on the ground back where we'd been working out. It wasn't unusual to take it out of my pocket and toss it onto my shirt or water bottle pile while running. With the field emptying out quickly, we knew we had to act fast. I got back out of the car, and Mikey followed close behind as we made our way back across the park, retracing our steps. The light was fading fast, and the air had that quiet, unsettled quality of a place slipping into darkness. As we neared the grassy area where we had been running, I spotted someone, just a silhouette at first, standing near where we'd left our things. At first I thought he was just another visitor, maybe someone walking through, but then I saw him look down, crouch, and pick something up from the ground. My heart skipped. I could see from the distance that it was a phone, my phone. I immediately started running toward him, shouting. He turned instantly, and without a word began speed walking away. His steps quickened with every shout. I called out again, louder this time, telling him it was mine, that I just left it there, that he didn't have to run. But he ignored everything. He was heading toward the opposite lot, the back one, that wasn't near any main roads and had fewer streetlights. That's when I realized he was trying to get away before we could reach him. I sprinted after him, determined not to lose sight. Mikey was behind me yelling too, but the man never turned around. As he reached the lot, he broke into a full run and darted into a small silver car that was parked alone near the back fence. He slammed the door shut just as I was getting close, started the engine and sped off. Turning onto the winding road that snaked around the edge of the park, I didn't think. I just turned around and ran, full speed back to my car, yelling for Mikey to do the same. We jumped in, slammed the doors and peeled out of the lot, just in time to spot the tail lights of the man's car as he exited the park and headed out onto the road. We followed him at a safe distance, the adrenaline pounding in my ears. I didn't know what I was planning to do. I didn't want to confront him at his home or anything, but I couldn't let him vanish with my phone. The drive lasted almost 10 minutes. He made no erratic turns, no attempts to shake us. That made me think maybe he hadn't noticed we were following him. We stayed back, just far enough not to be suspicious. Eventually he pulled onto a quiet residential street lined with small single-story houses and street lamps casting soft yellow light. He parked in front of one, got out of his car, and started walking toward the door as if nothing strange had happened. I stepped out of my vehicle and called out again, trying to sound calm. "Hey, that's my phone. I saw you pick it up at the park." He turned, looked me right in the eye and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then he turned his back to me and kept walking. His voice wasn't aggressive, just dismissive, like he truly believed denying it would be enough to shut me up. I walked closer, still calling out, but I didn't want to get too near. Something about him, about his composure, was unsettling. That's when a woman came out from inside the house, holding a baseball bat. The man called something over his shoulder, and she walked straight toward me and Mikey, her grip on the bat tightening with each step. The man, too, had grabbed a bat and now stood behind her, daring us to come closer. We both backed away, slowly returning to the car. The tension in the air was sharp and brittle. They didn't swing, but they didn't put the bats down either. It was a standoff. As soon as we got inside the car, I started it up and reversed down the road. I didn't want this to escalate. I didn't want someone to get hurt over a phone, but I knew what I had seen. We drove down the next street, parked out of sight and called the police. Mikey gave them the street name, the house description, and explained what had happened. About 10 minutes later, 2 squad cars rolled in quietly and parked outside the house. We watched from a distance as the officers approached the door. They knocked, talked for a few minutes, and then one of the officers suddenly reached for the man who tried to back away. A struggle broke out and another officer quickly moved in. The woman disappeared inside and soon more officers arrived. We later learned they had been running an illegal operation out of that house, drug distribution according to the police, and my phone, miraculously, was recovered from a basket inside. The officers said the man had several phones in his possession. Mine was still unlocked, still open to my workout playlist. Getting it back should have made me feel better, but the whole experience left me shaken. It wasn't just about the stolen phone anymore. It was the knowledge that someone had deliberately taken it, lied about it, and was possibly trying to intimidate us from confronting him. And it could have gone so much worse. If we had walked closer, if we hadn't backed off when they grabbed the bats, who knows what could have happened. I kept thinking about how casual it had all been. A public park, A stranger walking by, no threats, no shouting, just a quiet theft followed by something far more dangerous than either of us expected. It was the kind of moment that starts small and spirals fast. In the end, I was lucky. Lucky Mikey was there. Lucky the police took it seriously. Lucky that the man wasn't more violent. But I learned something that day about the thin line between ordinary and dangerous, about how quickly an evening jog can turn into a chase, a confrontation, a police report. I also learned that people can lie to your face even when you've seen the truth with your own eyes, and that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the act itself, it's the silence that follows it, the denial, the cold, steady gaze of someone who knows exactly what they did and doesn't care if you know too. Story 8. The man at my door after the work party. It happened in the late 1990s, during a time in my life when I was living alone in a cozy little house just outside the city. I worked for a large corporate company with multiple offices throughout the region, and though the job was demanding, I enjoyed the occasional social perks that came with it. One of those perks was a company wasted party held at a downtown hotel. It was a big deal. Hundreds of employees from different branches were invited, and everyone was buzzing with excitement leading up to it. I remember feeling a bit hesitant about going at first, but I convinced myself it would be fun, and for the first few hours, it was. The music was upbeat, the drinks flowed freely, and I mingled with co-workers I hadn't seen in ages. I laughed, danced, and soaked up the atmosphere, enjoying myself more than I expected. Near the end of the night, as the crowd began to thin and people trickled out, I found myself standing off to the side, sipping from my nearly empty glass. That's when a man approached me. He introduced himself as someone from another branch. I don't remember his name, only that I didn't recognize him. He seemed confident, maybe a little too confident, and something in his demeanor put me on edge. I couldn't quite place it. His eyes held this strange intensity, as though he was trying to memorize my face, my posture, my every move. He asked me basic questions: where I worked, how long I'd been with the company, what I liked about my job. But I found myself giving short, clipped answers. I didn't want to be rude, but I wasn't interested in continuing the conversation. Still, I smiled politely and tried to be cordial. He asked for my number, and instead of saying no outright, I gave him a fake one. Back then, not everyone had cell phones, so it was easier to get away with a false contact. After that, I said goodbye to a few friends and made my way out of the hotel. My car was parked a few blocks down, and the walk was uneventful. I drove the familiar route back to my quiet neighborhood, glad to be heading home. I pulled into my driveway, stepped inside and began to unwind. I changed into my pajamas, washed my face, and was about to make some tea when I heard a knock at the door. I froze. It was nearly 11 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighborhood was normally quiet at night. I hadn't seen my neighbors that day and no one had called ahead. Slowly, cautiously, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. And there he was, the man from the party. My stomach dropped. I opened the door only halfway, just enough to peer out, and asked what he was doing there. His face was different now. No friendly smile, no easy charm. He looked angry. He told me he had called the number I gave him, and it had belonged to someone else, a man. He knew I had lied and he wanted to know why. I told him I wasn't interested and that he needed to leave. I didn't yell or panic. I kept my voice firm but even, but he wasn't having it. He started to shout, saying I had led him on, that I'd embarrassed him. He took a step forward and I instinctively tried to close the door. He shoved it, catching it just before it latched, his hand pressed hard against the frame. We were locked in a silent struggle, both of us gripping the door, me pushing with everything I had. I was terrified, but I didn't let it show. With all my strength, I managed to slam the door shut and lock it. He immediately began banging on it, his fists thudding loudly against the wood, shaking the frame. I backed away slowly, grabbing the phone to call the police. I shouted through the door that I was calling them, hoping it would scare him off. At first he didn't stop. Then, after a long pause, the banging ceased. I held my breath, listening to the silence. A few moments later, I peeked through the peephole again. He was gone. I waited, unsure if he was still nearby, hiding in the shadows, but eventually I saw no sign of him. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I gave them a full report, told them everything I knew, his name, where he claimed to work, what he looked like. They said they would look into it, but I never heard anything more. For days afterward, I was afraid to leave the house. I'd check the windows constantly, watch the street from behind the curtains. Every knock made me jump. I was afraid he might come back, might try to follow me again, might escalate the situation. But he never did. I never saw him again. Not at work, not on the street, not in any of the follow-up emails or office updates. It was as though he had vanished, but the damage had been done. I no longer felt safe in my own home. The realization that someone could watch you at a party, learn just enough about you to follow you home and show up uninvited at your door. That kind of fear doesn't just fade overnight. In the years since, I've often thought about what might have happened if I hadn't been able to close that door. What if he'd forced his way in? What if I hadn't given him a fake number and instead said no directly? Would he have still followed me? There are so many possibilities, so many what-ifs that circle in my mind. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and became far more cautious about who I spoke to, who I trusted, and what I shared. Never again gave out a fake number. If I wasn't interested, I said so plainly. That night taught me that even the smallest white lie, told for convenience or safety, could carry unexpected consequences. What still haunts me the most isn't the confrontation itself. It's how quickly it all happened. 1 second I was standing in the warmth of a party, surrounded by friends and co-workers laughing and sipping wine, and the next I was fighting to keep a stranger out of my house, alone in the dark, trying not to let the fear show in my voice. It taught me how thin the boundary can be between comfort and danger, how quickly a stranger can turn into a threat, and perhaps more than anything, it taught me how important it is to trust your instincts. Because even when everything looks normal, even when someone smiles and makes small talk, there may be something darker beneath the surface, something watching, waiting, and following you home when you least expect it. Story 9. The night the porch light wouldn't turn on. It was the kind of evening I'd grown to appreciate. Quiet, still, and cloaked in the kind of calm that settles in small towns after dark. I had been living alone for about a year in a modest single-story home at the edge of a neighborhood just shy of rural. The street was lined with old oak trees that reached out toward each other, their branches forming a canopy of tangled shadows over the road. My neighbors were few and far between, the houses spaced out just enough to feel both peaceful and slightly isolated. That night, I had finished dinner, done the dishes, and settled onto the couch with a book and a blanket. The only sounds were the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of the house, adjusting to the dropping temperature outside. I hadn't expected anything unusual. Nights like this were always quiet, until they aren't. Around 10:30 p.m. I got up to lock the doors and turn off the porch light. The light had been flickering recently, something I'd chalked up to a faulty bulb or loose wiring. But tonight, when I reached to flip the switch, it didn't turn on at all. No flicker, just darkness. I checked the bulb through the window, it looked fine. Still, I made a mental note to replace it in the morning. I figured it wasn't worth bothering over so late, and I didn't plan to step outside again anyway. I turned back toward the hallway, ready to get ready for bed, when I heard something, a distinct crunching sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves just outside the front window. I froze mid-step. My first instinct was to dismiss it, maybe an animal, I told myself, a raccoon or stray cat. But then it happened again, louder this time, and followed by what sounded unmistakably like a soft shuffle of footsteps across the gravel walkway leading to the porch. I moved carefully toward the front of the house, my steps soundless against the wooden floor. I leaned close to the front window and peered through the curtain, trying not to let my silhouette be seen. At first I saw nothing. just the shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. But then, from the edge of the yard, a figure emerged. A man. He was walking slowly, casually, as if he had every right to be there. He wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. The porch light was still dead, so it was hard to see him clearly, but something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. He wasn't drunk or staggering. He wasn't in a hurry either. He was moving with eerie deliberation, like he knew exactly where he was going and who he was there for. I backed away from the window and rushed to the hallway to grab my phone. My hands were shaking as I tried to dial, but just before I hit the emergency button, I stopped. Something told me to look again, to make sure he was really approaching the house and not just cutting across the yard. I tiptoed back and peeked through the side window. He was gone. The yard was empty. I stared for a long time, waiting for him to reappear from behind the hedges or to step into the narrow gap between the garage and the fence. But nothing. The silence returned. The night stood still. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, or that he had just been passing through. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he realized he was on private property and turned around. That's what I told myself. I locked every door and checked each window twice. Still feeling uneasy, I went to the bedroom and turned on a small lamp. Before sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at the floor for what felt like a full minute before glancing back toward the hallway. That's when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. They weren't loud or frantic. They were calm, heavy. Knuckles on wood, spaced exactly 3 seconds apart. I didn't move. My heart was pounding now, louder than the clock, louder than the wind outside. Whoever it was hadn't rung the doorbell. He hadn't spoken. He had just knocked once, twice, 3 times. I waited, praying that it was over, that he would walk away. But after the silence stretched on, a 4th knock came, softer this time, almost hesitant. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I reached for my phone again and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver as the dispatcher answered. I told her someone was outside my home, knocking on the door, and that I didn't recognize them. She asked if I could describe them. I told her about the man in the coat, the hat, and the way he had moved. She said an officer would be dispatched immediately. I stayed on the line with her, whispering responses while staring toward the front of the house. Then, as if he had heard the call through the walls, the knocking stopped. No footsteps followed, no voice, just stillness. After a few minutes, the sound of a car slowly rolling down the street reached my ears. The red and blue lights reflected faintly on the living room wall. I rushed to meet them, my voice still shaking as I explained everything. They checked the yard, the hedges, the side of the house. Nothing. The officers were kind but not particularly concerned. No signs of forced entry, no damage, no suspect. They took my statement, advised me to leave lights on outside and lock all doors, and left with a vague promise to patrol the neighborhood more frequently. I stood there for a long time after they left, watching the shadows dance across the lawn as the wind picked up again. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lamp on and sat in bed with my phone clutched in one hand and a kitchen knife on the nightstand, just in case. The next morning, I replaced the porch bulb. It worked immediately. No flickering, no delay, just a steady, reassuring glow that made the events of the night before feel strangely distant. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked somehow. Not attacked, not robbed, but studied, watched. The way the man had walked across the yard. The way he knocked without saying a word. It didn't feel random. It felt like a rehearsal, like he had done this before. Maybe he was testing me, seeing how long it would take me to call the police or whether I would answer the door. Maybe he just wanted to see the fear. I don't know. I never saw him again. Never heard another knock like that one. But I still think about him. I think about the night the porch light wouldn't turn on, and how the darkness outside made him feel invisible. And I wonder how many other doors he knocked on that night. How many other lights failed at just the wrong time. I've since installed motion detectors, security cameras, and reinforced locks. I sleep with my phone fully charged and my car keys within reach, but no amount of preparation fully erases the memory of those 3 slow knocks, the pause and then the fourth, a quiet pattern carved into the fabric of my mind. I live a little more carefully now, never fully trusting silence, never assuming a knock is just a neighbor or a package, because once you've had a stranger appear in the night with no reason, no words, and no expression, you start to understand how fragile the boundary between ordinary and terrifying truly is. And you start to realize that sometimes the light doesn't go out because the bulb is bad. Sometimes it goes out because someone wanted it that way.